Hello and welcome to my Frost Mage guide for 9.1.5. This is going to be a complete guide. It's going to cover literally everything. You can just see it in the timeline below or the kind of video duration bar if you prefer that. You'll be able to skip to whichever section you'd like to watch. Yeah, hopefully you enjoy and learn something. So for starters, the biggest choice, right, now that 9.1.5 is out, is your Covenant. And Frost Mage has two very viable covenants, mainly in dungeons is where this will be aimed at. If you're in raid, you should always be Manather, at least right now. For Mythic Plus though, another really viable option is Night Fae. Night Fae is actually a lot more forgiving if you mistime your Icy Veins, so you can't guarantee that you're going to have it at 100% uptime from pack to pack. The Night Fae is a really good play. I would recommend honestly just playing Night Fae in most of the dungeons, unless you really need single target in your comp, and then just playing Venthyr in Theater of Pain and like Sanguine Depths if you're lacking single target, because the bosses in Sanguine Depths really slap. But yeah. I wanted to talk to you about the Soulbinds and Conduits that we'd use as a Frost Mage. So for starters, if you're Night Fae, you're going to want to use Dreamweaver in every situation, so that's the second Soulbind. And if you're Venthyr, you'll want to use Theater, also the second Soulbind, in every situation. And that will be all three potency conduits are what you're going to want to take. Now, for single target, the potency conduits that you take as Night Fae are Icy Propulsion, this is always locked in, Ice Bite, and Unrelenting Cold. Now, for Night Fae, the only time this ever changes is if you're running Freezing Rain, which I explained earlier in the video, but you're not going to run it unless you're in a 20+ key, and some specific dungeons. Then you would swap Ice Bite out for Shivering Core. But anytime you have this legendary equipped, so Freezing Winds with Splitting Ice, or just anytime you have Splitting Ice, you run Ice Bite instead of Shivering Core. Just run Ice Bite. Now if you're Venthyr, it will be a little bit different. In single target, you're going to want to take the Venthyr specific potency conduit, which is called Siphon Malice, and replace Unrelenting Cold, because Unrelenting Cold is only really an AOE increase. It's still single target increase, but Siphon Malice is a bigger single target increase than Unrelenting Cold is. And if you're Venthyr and you swap to AOE, you'll run this, right? So AOE, you run Ice Repulsion, Ice Bite, and Unrelenting Cold if you have Splitting Ice on. If you have Freezing Rain, you run Shivering Core. These are your three for AoE. This is the same for Venthyr. The only thing that changes is in single target for Venthyr, you are running your Venthyr specific conduit, Siphon Malice. I want to mention this really quick. Your most important conduit for Frost this entire expansion is just Icy Propulsion, because it's the one that gives you cooldown reduction inside Icy Veins, and the way it works is it triggers off all Frost spells except for Blizzard, right? And it also triggers off of Arcane Explosion Shifting Power. So Frozen Orb, Arcane Explosion Shifting Power if you're Night Fae will be the main way to your Icy Veins cooldown back in AoE, and with the 9.1.5 changes where Frozen Orb is uncapped, Arcane Explosion and Shifting Power are a lot less valuable in mass AoE than just getting Blizzard and Frozen Orb out as soon as possible. And the Blizzard's just to, get more Frozen Orbs out. Alright, time to mention some rotational things. You should keep Blizzard up 100% of the time on 2 or more targets. You should not hold Rune of Power for Frozen Orb. And single target, you can overlap Mirrors of Torment and Frozen Orb. It's best to just honestly get both on cooldown. If you really want, you can hold your orb till the end to Mirrors of Torment, but typically we don't do that because orb is such a short cooldown, and staying on pull usually has it line up better with other abilities later on. And if you're Night Fae and pure single target, if you're in your cooldowns, you should just immediately cancel Shifting Power to have the Dreamweaver haste buff. If you have both Rune of Power on cooldown and Frozen Orb, and you're playing Dreamweaver, then it's fine to just full cast Shifting Power, but you really don't want to do that generally, and it'll just depend on what your cooldowns are doing. So just auto cancel on single target because it's kind of bad to cast. Frost Legendaries. So you actually have 3 choices here as a Frost Mage. Your first build should always be Freezing Winds, you should build that on the hands if you are raiding, and on the helmet if you don't plan to raid at all in Sanctum Domination. That's because helmet is a dom socket piece. So yeah, and that is your default for every situation, right? It is the best cleave legendary, it's the best funnel legendary, it's the best priority target legendary, so we kind of just use it in everything. But if you're only doing single target damage that has little to no downtime, so for example in this raid tier, a fight like Terragru or the Guardian, then you can run Slick Ice because that's a lot more single target damage than Freezing Winds. But it's also heavily punished by a lot of downtime. That's why, for instance, on Painsmith, typically for Mythic, you'll see a lot of people running Freezing Winds because there's 50-second downtimes twice in that fight. In 9.1.5, Glacial Fragments is kind of making a comeback because it is getting uncapped. So that's great. It does a lot of damage in mass AoE, but the problem with Glacial Fragments still remains that it kind of removes Frost's greatest strength, being the majority of its funnel or priority damage, and it just increases its greatest weakness, which is its single target damage, because with Glacial Fragments you have like no single target damage. You're literally going to do negative single target damage. So really you can run Glacial Fragments on fortified weeks, but to be honest I'd recommend just always running with Freezing Winds. That's what Frost Mages have been doing the past 2 tiers, and what you should probably continue doing. Also to mention about the AoE rotation, if you're in Frozen Orb with Freezing Winds, then it's better to Arcane Explosion during Orb between Ice Lance procs at 4 or more targets instead of Frostbolt as a filler. And with Freezing Rain, Arcane Explosion instead of an empowered Ice Lance at 6+ targets is more overall damage but not more priority damage, and with Splain Ice it's around 11 targets to Arcane Explosion instead of a Fingers of Frost proc. I'll just quickly flash the talents up here. There's only 2 things to mention here. The reason that you take Ice Ward over Ring of Frost or Frigid Winds is because Ice Ward is a DPS increase, and that's because you can shatter your AoE spells, which I'll show you in the AoE rotation portion of the video. But basically, when Frozen Orb and Blizzard are out on about 5+ targets, you should Frost Nova if Icy Veins is active, because that will trigger a lot of Icy Propulsion cooldown reduction from your Frozen Orb critting. So that's why you take Ice Ward, just so you can shatter more often. And then the other choice is between Splain Ice and Freezing Rain. If you are doing any key that is below a 20 or say like a 21, just always take Splain Ice. It's not worth it to ever take Freezing Rain. The only time you take Freezing Rain is when you're in a dungeon that has a lot of big pulls and the tank's not going to be perma-kiting out of your Blizzard. So the mobs just don't live long enough below a 20 for Freezing Rain to really be worth it. So stats. For Frostmage stats, there's no like breakpoints to hit or anything. The main important thing to know is that the soft cap for crit and single target is 33.33%. That doesn't matter, that is not a goal. You're going to want to sim your own character using raid bots, which I suppose link in the description below. You're going to want to sim your character to see what stats or what piece of gear upgrades for you. But as a general rule, so this is not a hard rule, sim your character. Generally, you're going to want around 30% crit, over 20% haste. Literally no mastery if you can do that. And then versus, it's nice to have, and it's a better set than haste and mass AoE, so you'll want some. But yeah, sim your character. For trinkets, you can check one of my previous videos as a gear guide for all 3 specs in 9.1.5, but I'm just going to put it quickly. A combination of Ocular Gland from the Eye, Indivisible Ooze from Plaguefall, the Forbidden Necromantic Tome from Kel'Thuzad, and Unbound Changeling from Mist of Tyrannus Scythe will likely be your best pick, and you should sim each trinket combination once you get it. But those are by far Frost's best trinkets. We really like having 2 passive trinkets right now because we just are a huge consistent damage class. Alright, so I'm going to do a sample AoE rotation for you guys with Splain Ice and with Freezing Rain, but to start I wanted to talk about something You see these two procs? These are the two main procs that Frost has. One of these is more important than the other in AoE, and that's going to be this, your Fingers of Frost proc. Because if I do this, they both crit. If I do this, that didn't crit. It also did like no damage. See? That's because the Fingers of Frost proc counts as if it was frozen against both targets with Splain Ice. But the Flurry only makes your Ice Lance count as frozen against the target that you were targeting. So Fingers of Frost does way more damage in a multi-target scenario than Flurry does. So you just want to prioritize casting Fingers of Frost more than you want Flurry. Because Flurry just, it doesn't really matter in large AoE. Anyway, if you were going to start an AoE pool, what you would do is Mirror's Image. This actually reduces your threat. They just disperse your threat, so you're not going to get threat. It also has a 20% damage reduction, but that's okay. You're going to precast Blizzard, then shoot your orb, this, and then you just start pumping. I'm going to ignore Flurry until I have an open space, because Fingers of Frost is more important. I'm going to delay casting Shifting Power until I get my rune off. Then I get my second Frozen Orb. It's important to note if you have pillar space here between your Fingers of Frost procs, you should Frostbolt like I did right there. And you just keep saying this. If you were Venthyr, you just ignore the Shifting Power that I cast there. And all you do is just this, recasting Blizzard and shooting Ice Lances. I should have stopped and recasted Blizzard. It's more important to have Blizzard up than to deal with a Flurry proc like I did there. So here, recast Blizzard before dealing with these. And then I cast this. See, this doesn't matter. That's my Warrior's Chill, but that doesn't matter. Because I'm doing multiple targets, so it's more important to get Frozen Orb off on cooldown as soon as possible. We're gonna do this. I accidentally clipped my Fingers of Frost there. That's why it's helpful to have this tracker to know if you want to cancel your Frostbolt, I think. So yeah, that's an example of Splain Ice. Next I'm going to show you how to do it with Freezing Rain. Alright, so as you can see now, I have Freezing Rain. All this is going to do is really make Blizzard a higher priority than pretty much any other spell that you have in AoE. And it excels most at like a 4+ target count, and we're testing on 3, but it's still fine enough to show you how it works. So you're going to want to do the same thing, except you're going to want to delay your Blizzard till after you cast Orb, because a precast Blizzard doesn't get the benefit of the damage increase from Freezing Rain. So this, and then if you're Night Fae, you immediately start channeling to that, and now your Ice Lances are only going to hit one target. Do this. Shouldn't have cast that Frostbolt there, but I got an unexpected proc. You'll notice that a lot in Frost. It's a lot of proc munching. So my rotation outside of Icy Veins is exactly what you would do if you were Venthyr. Just keeping Blizzard up, and then casting Frozen Orb as soon as possible, and casting Rune of Power when it's up. I didn't mention this in the other one, but I'll do it next time. Okay, so I have Blizzard and Frozen Orb out. Boom. Frost Nova. And you'll notice that all those crit. Do it again. Boom. Frost Nova. It's a lot of crits right there. That's because they're shattering. I mentioned it earlier, but that's the practical application of it. So yeah, that's really all you do in AoE is Frost Mage. It's a pretty simple rotation. Obviously, if you're at 4+ targets, you can use Arcane Explosion. At 6+, you know, it becomes more important than Ice Lancing if you're Freezing Rain. I wouldn't really do much about that. Using Arcane Explosion isn't really a damage increase like at all. I'd recommend just ignoring that and sticking to basics. If you're new to Frost Mage, just Ice Lance. Use all your procs. So, yeah. Thanks for watching this AOE rotation part of the guide. So, if you've watched any Frost Mage gameplay, you'll probably notice that people tend to Frostbolt and then cast Flurry. The reason for that is, as you can see here, Flurry puts 2 Winter's Chill debuffs on the target. Well, there's actually 3 hits of Flurry, right? So it's 3 separate projectiles. And so if I get another one, watch this. You're gonna wanna look at its debuff thing. You'll see it just refreshed itself 3 times. So it only started ticking down after the 3rd one hit. And what that means is that the 2 debuff limit of it, right? The 2 things that let you shatter your ice lances against it actually gets applied twice before that. So technically you could theoretically shatter 6 spells, but you can't because the Flurry things hit too fast. However, Flurry travels faster than Frostbolt, but only slightly faster. So your Frostbolt is actually hitting in between some of the Flurry hits, and what that does is it gives your Frostbolt an increased chance to crit. So that is why people generally Frostbolt before they Flurry. And you should definitely just do that all the time in single target unless you're playing Mirror's Torment and you're going to clip your next Flurry proc. To give you guys an idea of how your rotation will actually end up looking like in single target, I'm just going to do a 1-minute rotation on this target dummy. So you guys can just watch and see what happens. You just start with that, right? Unfortunately, my shifting power wasn't hitting it, but that's alright. What I should have done there is not Frostbolt in my Flurry, because then I could have extended my Icy Veins long enough to where I'd get the second Frozen Orb in, and probably would have been able to chain another Icy Veins, but it's kind of a little hard to determine the heat of the moment because Frost is a very reaction based spec. But as you can see now, I'm just waiting until I get Icy Veins back. This is kind of like the dead time in single target for Frost. If you don't have Slick Ice, you can't guarantee 100% uptime on Icy Veins unless you're in Lust. So you can see I cast my Icy Veins after I did the Frostbolt Flurry. That's because they are actually calculated when they hit the target and not when they leave your character. So the crits just count towards, well, at least Flurry is calculated when it hits the target. So yeah. I should probably be staying a little bit closer to the target dummy because if you noticed, the Frozen Orb reached after my global. We're going to cancel that early because I'm not actually going to fit another Frozen Orb in, so we're just trying to fish for a Flurry proc before, so I could maybe reset my Ice Veins. That's not too far off. So yeah. That's how you play Frost Mage single target. And that's going to be it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions about anything, you can leave in the comments below. I hope you learned something. So yeah, have fun playing one of the most fun specs of the game because it's really broken right now, at least in Mythic Plus.